Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Pete. I'm talking with Dr. John Cavadini, Professor of Theology at the University of Notre Dame, and he joins us to talk about a new study that was released by the University of Notre Dame that calls for better preparation for celibacy, greater use of psychological resources, and a focus on vocational quality over quantity. John, thank you very much for making the time. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you.
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for, as usual, I greatly enjoy reconnecting with you.
Thank you, me too.
This study, do you know them to be worthy? But I know you had a hand in contributing to it. I wonder if you could just walk us through the general overview of the amount of work that went into it.
Sure. It began with a study that the McGrath Institute for Church Life commissioned from CARA, Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, on how seminaries and dioceses assess seminarians' suitability for ordination. And this survey was supervised by and developed with the help of Father Tom Berg, who is visiting associate professor at the McGrath Institute for Church Life, and his collaborator, Dr. Timothy G. Locke. So they worked on the development of the instrument, and then CARA did the survey, and it came up with a lot of data that that we then considered by convening a group over 4 days of seminary rectors, seminary formators, one bishop, psychological personnel, etc., to work through the results of the CARA research and to come up with recommendations based on it, but also based on the practical experience of everyone in the room, the shared practical experience. And in the end, the two authors of the report, Father Tom Berg and Dr. Locke, who wrote the report, reflected the judgment of the group, but also their own prudential judgment in putting it together.
One of the things you highlighted in your foreword was that you wanted to make clear that what's being proposed here is not just a negative instrument, and by that I mean an instrument to weed out elements of poor quality in candidates. It's also meant to contribute to the building of positive instruments for better formation. Could you please shed light on that for us?
Exactly. Well, we first did a survey, the first of its kind, back in 2019. It was released in 2019 on the prevalence or lack thereof of sexual harassment in seminaries and the kinds of policies that were or were not available to report them and to educate seminarians. And one of the results of that study was a persistent call for better screening of seminarians in a lot of the written comments that seminarians wrote in. There was a survey of seminarians that they wrote in anonymously. The whole thing was anonymous, otherwise we wouldn't have gotten any data. And we took that into consideration, but we thought that the idea of better screening was only a partial idea, as essentially a kind of negative idea, because the fundamental idea is assessment for readiness and how to either screen out people who really aren't ready or appropriate for seminary formation, or more importantly, for ordination, or to help the assessment ought to ideally help the formation team provide the kind of formation that will aid in the growth of the seminarian so that they do qualify authentically for ordination.
As you've also noted that the instruments and the rationales have been grouped into three categories. Could you please explain to us the rationale behind the grouping and why they're necessary?
Sure. the three groups, proposals aimed at a more effective use of psychological services in the formation process, the largest group. Then proposed best practices regarding candidates with special needs. And then the third group, proposals aimed at supporting chastity and celibacy formation in particular. Okay, so the first group aimed at more effective use of psychological services in the formation process. This basically was partly came out of the Caris survey, which had which showed that there were new needs among seminarians now as opposed to 10 or 15 years ago. The American Psychological Association report includes a large percentage of adults experience isolation, at least one symptom of stress, needing more emotional support, almost 70%, and that the type of psychological evaluation offered needs to take those background concerns into effect. But this Caris study also found that sexual compulsivity, unresolved traumas, immature dependency, boundary issues, deep-seated psychosexual confusion are not always adequately surfaced during or addressed during the formation process, that seminary formation programs are often underserved by psychological sciences, and so we tried to make recommendations that would make better use of, more strategic use of, more consistent use of, and more transparent use of psychological evaluations. For example, instead of just evaluating someone at the point of admission, we advise a second evaluation because the shelf life of these evaluations generally is only about 3 weeks. Furthermore, we emphasize that the psychological evaluation must be understood not merely as a screening instrument, but as a tool for growth and ongoing formation, and therefore it should be available to the formation team, to the primary formator and the team. And that there ought to be a full-time director of psychological services on staff at the seminary, because the way in which the initial psychological evaluation or even a second one are communicated with the seminarians are often spotty, sometimes very inadequate, sometimes adequate. There needs to be somebody at the seminary who can help a guy understand what's being said, and in a sympathetic way, and follow through. So the importance of and better use of psychological formation in psychological testing in seminary formation is meant to better integrate those psychological services into the formation program as a tool of assessment and not just of screening. The second group of recommendations, that is, for those with recommendations for those with special needs, these were directed, for example, to seminarians who might appear somehow on the spectrum of autism. I'm not sure that's the right way of saying it, but with autism spectrum disorder, I guess, is the right, and related disorder. That is, if you admit someone who shows autism spectrum disorder, then you have to have, and you should have, you're morally responsible to the guy to have services that will help that person develop. We don't say they shouldn't be admitted. We're saying that if you do admit them, you need to have empathetic services helping them to the end of being good pastoral ministry, and this includes medications for attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, etc.
So, John, we're going to pause right there because the music is hitting, but we're going to continue on the other side of the break. I'm blessed to be joined by Dr. John Cavadini, Professor of Theology at the University of Notre Dame, talking about a new instrument and report that's come out of the University of Notre Dame. Stay tuned. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Beat. I'm talking with Dr. John Cavadini, Professor of Theology at the University of Notre Dame. We are talking about this new report that's come out, particularly of the McGrath Institute for Church Life, called 12 Proposals for Bishops, Rectors, Seminary Formation Teams, and Mental Health Professionals in Assessing the Suitability of Men for Holy Orders. John, we were cut off by the break, but like you were mentioning, one of the things that the instrument and report aims to put forth is assessment that can help screen, for example, people with on the ASD, on the spectrum, and to see how particular tools can be put in place to support them through their ongoing formation.
Yeah, I mean, we're not saying that automatically disqualifies someone for admission. That has to be a judgment made by the seminary. But if you do admit such a person, you need to provide the services that such a person would need to develop into an effective pastoral minister. And the same is true for significant formative deficits in admitted candidates, such as significant deficits in cognitive empathy, persistent struggles involving pornography use or masturbation. These kinds of things you need to address with special resources to make sure that they're there. So Section 3 is proposals aimed at supporting chastity and celibacy formation. And there's 3 of those. The first one is that when men first enter the configuration phase, they should already have been sexually continent for a sustained period of time of at least several months without a lapse. And similarly, prior to being called to the diaconate, seminarians should have been living in continence for a longer period, typically 12 months or more, without lapsing. So
some of these... go ahead, please.
Participants on our summit were clear that we needed clearer benchmarks for continence prior to advancing candidates for to further stages of ordination. So that's why we tried to create these benchmarks.
Mm-hmm. And thereby, John, if you don't mind me jumping in, so much of what you're sharing pertaining to these benchmarks, one would presume is common sense, but it's the explicit stating of the benchmarks that becomes a uniform instrument and tool that seminaries can use to gauge as part of their discernment.
Yes, and the commitment to them is also what's important. Mm-hmm. So we're committing ourselves to these things, and that means, you devote institutional energies and resources to them. We also, the second one of these was to urge bishops to foster and actively engage in the necessary conversations, theologically and pastorally, regarding admissions to orders of candidates who experience same-sex attraction. And the authors of this report concludes that someone with deep-seated same-sex attraction should not be admitted to holy orders, acknowledging that there is disagreement among the bishops on that. Mm-hmm. So most of the bishops agree with that recommendation.
I was going to ask, is that one of those recommendations that's going to see some level of a pushback?
Well, all of these could receive some level, and already have received some level of pushback. I think that some pushback is due to the feeling that this report is a kind of, is alarmist. It's not alarmist at all. It's not saying that the state of seminary formation is generally poor. It doesn't make that claim at all. In fact, it notes recent advances in seminary formation and is convinced that on the whole it's healthy. But you see, we keep ending up with situations like, if I'm not mistaken, the priest no longer in active ministry but not laicized, who was recently arrested at his home by the FBI for masturbating while watching child pornography. Like that's not a small mistake to ordain such a person. That's a big mistake, and it contributes endlessly to scandalizing lay Catholics and to scandalizing all Catholics, actually, and to contributing to discrediting the church or seeming to discredit the church. So the thing is, getting better is good, but you have to get to the point where these kinds of things are so rare as to be almost unimaginable, and we aren't at that point. And so I welcome pushback, but on the other hand, I'm going to push back in my turn, because a lot of times, well, at least what the McGrath Institute is trying to do here is that a lot of times, the sexual abuse crisis flares up, like it did in 2018, for instance, or like it is with Radha Rupnik. And then when the crisis seems to be addressed, everything goes back to normal, as it were. But we think that we have to develop in the church a culture of proactive and continuous addressing of this issue, because it is probably the gravest pathology in church life that we have, and the greatest cause of scandals. You could say, well, it's only one case. Yeah, but that one case, the one I mentioned, is so scandalous as to turn Catholics away from the church.
Yeah.
So, I understand the pushback. I understand that psychological services can be weaponized, but we do operate in imperfect human cultures in education. We can't let the possibility of the abuse of something good eliminate or scare us away from the use of that good thing, especially in the context of thinking about an integrated formation program that isn't intended to harass people or to target them, but to help them grow towards ministry, and also to make sure that the church, the people of God, are well served by the priests that are ordained. And we think that there is a lot of pressure. The Cara study found it's still true to ordain people who may not be suitable because the numbers are low. But that's a self-defeating proposal, because bad priests out there don't help the church. And the excellent priests, even if they're fewer, do build the church and do attract vocations. So we want to think of creating a seminary environment, a seminary culture, which is basically positive, integrative, serious, and on the lookout, nevertheless, for those cases that the kinds of psychological and pastoral formation and assessment that have been brought to bear believe should not advance to ordination.
I'm glad you brought that up, and we're down to about 3 minutes, John, and maybe that's a crucial question for us to wrap up this conversation on, which is everyone's concerned, laity as well as those in the clergy and in formation, about the vocations crisis and, frankly, even the decline of church attendance. But the solution shouldn't be, therefore, we'll admit and ordain anyone who's desiring and willing. And that's, in fact, reading this report has demonstrated that to me. So just please share with us about that.
I think that, and Bishop Darcy of blessed memory used to say all the time to me that, John, you have to ordain well-formed priests who are going to attract other guys to the priesthood. That's how you build up a stable and growing body of clergy, not by ordaining priests who are going to turn off the laity and discourage boys and men from thinking about the priesthood. And I think that Bishop Darcy's, in some ways, common sense advice is vindicated, or at least is underwrites this study. And I think there are so many other ways in which we can strengthen Catholic culture that will contribute to evangelization than by simply adding to numbers of priests because we need more guys. And we do. But you don't do it by improperly assessing and improperly admitting.
Yeah. Now, going back, therefore, to the way the instrument is structured, it becomes very clear that screening is a crucial, and in fact, in some ways, one could argue, a primary tool that's being put forth here. But also by virtue of that, to present instruments and techniques for ongoing formation. Just share the necessity of both of these from a psychological perspective and all of the other ways in which this report is calling for greater integration.
Yeah, there are two concluding recommendations outside of the 12 numbered ones, but the last one is that there remains a continual need for the adequate preparation and ongoing formation of seminary formators. We strongly recommend that bishops who are in a position to do so foster seminary policies requiring initial preparation for priests newly appointed as seminary formation faculty. And another one of these final recommendations was that bishops, this doesn't have to do with ongoing formation, but we did in a previous report recommend that seminarians be trained in competencies for counseling victims of sexual abuse, clerical and otherwise, and that those competencies be the subject of continuing formation even after ordination, so that the idea that formation is over when you're ordained seems to me to be one that's going out of style.
Yeah. John, tremendously honored to have spoken with you again. Thank you for making the time to speak about this.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking.
My guest has been Dr. John Cavadini, Professor of Theology at the University of Notre Dame. This report, Do You Know Them to Be Worthy?, published by the McGrath Institute. Do procure a copy and let's read it and support our priests. I'm Marcus Peter.